When a young woman meets the wealthy, mysterious Maxime de Winter in Monaco, it seems like an enviable love story. They're quickly engaged. She's whisked away to Manderley, an estate on the Cornish coast, very far from her old life of servitude and limited options. But something is very wrong. The Max she knew in Monaco is changed. Brooding, quick-tempered, and withdrawn. And Manderley, including a manipulative maid called Mrs. Danvers, feels crowded with the beloved memory of Max's ex-wife, the glamorous, beautiful, and imposing Rebecca. This story begins very famously like this. Last night I dreamed I went back to Manderley again. Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca is now 87 years old, an immediate bestseller, never once taken out of print, and one of the best examples of Gothic literature of all time. And it is today's Velshiban Book Club feature. There are some novels, oftentimes great novels, that are not done justice by their plot synopsis, and I think Rebecca is one of those. On the surface, Rebecca is melodramatic, brimming with lurid, gossipy details like a shipwreck, a costume ball outfit disaster, an illicit pregnancy. But deeper than that, Rebecca is a critical examination of the nature of traditional marriage, image versus reality, the danger of untold truths, and moral ambiguity. Characters are nuanced with complex motivation and setting. The foreboding and eerily beautiful Manderley estate is vividly created. Quote, Manderley stood out like an enchanted house, every window aflame, the gray walls colored by the falling stars, a house bewitched, carved out of the dark woods, end quote. Written in recollection by a narrator whose name we never learn, Rebecca is a masterclass in depicting instability. The events that transpire in the novel are told to us solely by our hopeful and naive narrator, but they're colored by everyone around her. This is not a ghost story. Rebecca does not appear as a spirit or a ghoul to our narrator, but her specter, her presence, looms over every interaction, over every memory, over every page. And despite our narrator's desperate and earnest attempts to find stable ground, at Manderley, perception, reality, and truth are something to be manipulated and used for control. Quote, I wondered how many people were in the world who suffered and continue to suffer because they could not break out from their own web of shyness and reserve, and in their blindness and folly, built up a great distorted wall in front of them that hid the truth. This was what I had done. I had built up false pictures in my mind and sat before them. I had never had the courage to demand the truth. Rebecca starts and ends abruptly, like we're picking up in the middle of the story. I promise I'm not giving away the ending of this Gothic tale if you haven't read it, but just know that there are few novels with such an arresting and poignant conclusion. To be honest, we did not want to discuss Daphne du Maurier's magnum opus with just anyone, so we won't. The author we have joining us today to examine Rebecca is one of the most influential contemporary writers of our time, winner of numerous awards, including a Pulitzer Prize, and the author of a Gothic novel of her own called The Keep. The author read Rebecca for the first time at just 11 years old, and as she tells it, was so deeply enthralled with the novel that her mother asked her to please stop reading it. The singular Jennifer Egan will join us right after a quick commercial break. Do not miss today's meeting of the Velshiban Book Club. Today's meeting of the Velshiban Book Club is officially underway. Today we are covering a true classic, the 87-year-old Gothic bestseller Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. But the novel is only half of the excitement of today's meeting. The other half is who is joining us for this. A hugely influential, award-winning and best-selling author of numerous books, including The Keep, A Visit from the Good Squad, and The Candy House. Jennifer Egan joins us now. Jennifer, a warm welcome to you. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
A key element of the Gothic genre, and of course in Rebecca, is setting. Manderley is vividly described from the first page of Rebecca as both beautiful and menacing. Let me just read a bit from there. Last night I dreamed I went to Manderley again. The drive wound away in front of me, twisting and turning as it had always done. But as I advanced, I was aware that a change had come upon it. It was narrow and unkept. Not the drive that we had known. Nature had come into her own again, and little by little, in her stealthy, insidious way, had encroached upon the drive with long, tenacious fingers. The woods, always a menace, even in the past, had triumphed in the end. They crowded, dark and uncontrolled, to the borders of the drive, end quote. Talk to me about the significance of Manderley in the context of Rebecca as a Gothic novel.
Well, Gothic novels usually tend to have strong, overwhelming physical environments. And in the middle of those environments, almost always is some old structure with a lot of history on it. Sometimes it's a castle. In this case, it's an old manor house that sort of exemplifies the long family history of Max de Winter. And some of the best writing in the book is actually the physical descriptions, the woods, the sea. And again, we have the experience of the protagonist being excited to see something like the ocean, which she associates with fun and relaxation. But when she actually sees it, it quickly turns into something threatening and sort of dark. A cloud crosses the sun, and she realizes that the ocean is scary. So that happens again and again. And physical environment is a lot of what delivers the ominous feeling that almost immediately begins to overwhelm this young bride when she arrives at the manor house of her husband.
And then there's this other thing, and it's Rebecca, right? The character who does not appear corporally, does not appear even as a spirit, and yet is a dominating force throughout the book. We actually only get to know Rebecca, the titular character, through other characters' memory and through the narrator's perception of her. Talk to me about how you started reading this when you were 11 years old, how you understand Rebecca as a myth or a manufactured image.
I mean, Rebecca immediately becomes, for the protagonist, this overwhelming, much more perfect version of Max de Winter's wife. So we hear immediately that she was more beautiful. She was very sophisticated. She did everything right. She hosted huge parties. Everyone loved her. Basically, she's a perfect ideal. And almost immediately, the protagonist begins to think, well, of course, Max de Winter, her husband, loved Rebecca much more than he loves me. Rebecca, by the way, has died tragically. She drowned a year earlier before the narrative begins. So Rebecca is an overpowering image of perfection that dwarfs the protagonist. And that's something I think all of us can relate to, the sense of being set up to fail because we can't possibly meet the standards and expectations that someone else has set. And of course, the real question as we read through is who actually was Rebecca? And as you might imagine, the truth is much more complicated than she was perfect, partly because, of course, no one is perfect. And it turns out that Rebecca's history is very tangled, and that's a lot of what the novel unfurls.
I was also drawn to the symbolism of dogs throughout Rebecca, especially Jasper, Max's spaniel. Let me read a short passage. Our narrator is sitting with Max and his sister. I listened to them both, leaning against Maxime's arm, rubbing my chin on his sleeve. He stroked my hand absently, not thinking, talking to Beatrice. That's what I do to Jasper, I thought. I'm being like Jasper now, leaning against him. He pats me now and again when he remembers, and I'm pleased. I get closer to him for a moment. He likes me in the way I like Jasper. Tell me a little about this.
Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, Max de Winter's behavior toward his new wife begins to change as soon as they arrive at Manderley. And he behaves in ways that I think, especially to a modern eye, are just totally unacceptable. I mean, he orders her around. He never says please. He treats her a bit like a servant, and the rest of the servants also do that. So his coldness toward her adds to her sense of alienation. I think that at the time the book was published, which was 1938, this might not have landed exactly the way that it does for us, but there's no question he is brusque and not himself. It turns out that he is concealing an enormous amount of history, and that is sort of making him rigid and cold. And I think we're meant to understand that it's those secrets that are keeping him from expressing the real love that he does feel for his new wife.
Talk to me about how you think that would be interpreted differently in 1938 than today.
I think maybe his coldness would not have been as objectionable as it is. I mean, when I read it at 11, I think I accepted more of this than I do now. Having reread it recently for this conversation, I thought, oh my God, this guy is a nightmare. But the truth is, so I mean, obviously those things do change. But one thing that's great about it is that the book owns the ridiculousness of his behavior. I mean, the passage you read, that she interprets his behavior toward her as what one would expect toward a pet. Right. So that is partly what I think makes the book possible to read with pleasure in a contemporary setting, the fact that it owns Max's cruelty at the beginning.
Now, of course, what my viewers are really excited about is that we've got Jennifer Egan here. And of course, you've written a Gothic novel of your own, which you've said has been inspired by Rebecca. It's called The Keep. It takes place in a decaying castle in Eastern Europe. Talk to me about the evolution of your reading of Rebecca and how it became influential in The Keep.
Well, the fun thing about Rebecca is it really is such a classic Gothic novel. It checks all of the boxes, but it also kind of transcends them, as I guess any good genre novel does. So we talked about the landscape, the sense of an old structure with a lot of history. Another classic Gothic trope is a young, kind of naive protagonist who ends up in this old environment and cut off from their origins. So basically kind of trapped. And then very shortly, the protagonist begins to experience scary phenomena. And often, I mean, the genre goes back to the 18th century. Often the phenomena seem to be supernatural. As you pointed out, in this case, that's not quite the case, but it is a haunting. And so it makes us ask the question, what does it mean to be haunted? Does it actually mean that there are ghosts? In this case, absolutely not. What we see is that being overshadowed and overwhelmed by a more perfect image that one cannot possibly match is a kind of haunting. So I guess I took both the tropes, which I love, the old moldering atmosphere, the kind of overwhelming physical environment, and the sense of the, quote unquote, innocent protagonist. And I made my own story out of that. My protagonist is a male party promoter who ends up trying to help renovate a castle in an unnamed country to turn it into a hotel. And guess what? Strange things begin to happen. It felt like a really fun genre to work in, and also a challenge because to work well in any genre, I think you have to find a way to make it your own, not just check the boxes, but use them to reflect in some relevant way on the world we live in now.